guys, welcome back to Paraclete TV. Today we'll be learning about ratios and rates involving fractions. We'll be using what we know from our previous videos about slope and constant rate of proportionality to be able to solve problems and graphs using ratios and rates. Okay, so as we know from the last video, a linear equation can be written as y equals mx, right? So now we're going to introduce the idea of ratios. Ratios are just basically another way to define slope or to define your proportionality constant. And that's when you take two numbers or two variables, a, and you compare them to the other variable, b, or y compared to x. Another way to write this is a over b, or y over x, which will give you slope, because if you solve this equation and divide both sides by x, y over x equals m, which equals slope. So, as I have here, y over x equals slope. And that is rise over run. So a way to solve any slope problem in math is to think rise over run. And that's always going to be true. It's always going to be the proportionality or the ratio of y to x. So when I say rise, I mean how far are you going up? And when I say run, I mean how far are you going over? Or just the distance you traveled on the y-axis compared to the distance you traveled on the x-axis. Okay, so if this point here was 1, 1, and this point here was 6, 5, and we want to find the slope between those 2 points, what would we do? Well, we would find the distance we went up compared to the distance we went over. So, rise is equivalent to the y, which is equivalent to the y coordinates. So that's 5 and 1. What's the difference between 5 and 1? Well, 5 minus 1 equals 4. So that's how far we rose. Now we're going to do run. How far did we go over? We have 1 and 6. So we'll do 6 minus 1 equals 5. So our slope and our ratio is 4 over 5. This is our slope here. So we can write our equation as y equals 4 over 5x. Another way to say slope is unit rate. So in a problem when they ask what is the unit rate, it is just the slope. It is how far did you go up or how far did you go down compared to how far you went left to right. Okay, so here I have an example. If a person walks 1/2 mile in 1/4 of an hour, compute the unit rate as a complex fraction and then simplify. So I've written out some steps here on how to solve this. First, let's create a drawing. So we start here and the time equals 0. And then the person walks along, blah, 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 for 1/4 of an hour, and he ends up at 1/2 of a mile. So how do we compute the unit rate? Well, another way to say unit rate is slope, right? And that's just y over x. So if we need y over x, we need to be able to identify x, and we need to be able to identify y. So in our last video, we talked about x being the independent variable and y being the dependent variable. In this problem, we have an independent variable and a dependent variable. One thing I mentioned last time is that time is always an independent variable because time always, always, always goes on. Regardless of where you're walking, what you're shopping, how much your cans cost, it always goes on. So for this problem, what is the x variable? It is time. And what is the value for time we have here? We have 1/4 of an hour. So equals 1/4 hour. So then what's the other variable we have in this problem? And it's distance. So that must be the y variable. And it makes sense that y depends on x. You depend on y depends on x. Your distance you travel depends on how long you walk for, right? So we have a half mile here. So distance, not time, distance equals 1/2 mile. So now to compute the unit rate, we just put y over x, right? So we have 1/2 mile divided by 1/4 of an hour. And that's going to give us, do 1/2 times 4/1, right? Times the reciprocal. So that equals 4/2, which equals 2. And let's carry the units. That's miles per hour. All right, thank you guys so much for watching this video on ratios and slope, and I will see you next time. Bye!